Tec Sounds presents EduTrends.
Welcome to the EduTrends podcast and webcast brought to you by the Institute for the Future of Education. I am José Pepe Escamilla, Institute for the Future of Education Associate Director. Today's guest is Melissa Loble. She is Chief Academic Officer at Instructure. Melissa, it is a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a great pleasure to be here as well.
Great. So, Melissa, I want to start this question about talking about microcredentials. But before going into more detail, that I've seen that in many places of the world, microcredential is like a big thing, a trend. People talking about that, projects, money going from some governments, etc. Why microcredentials are important and why it is a trend?
It's a great question. I think we're seeing globally that learners and in future employees are looking for alternative paths to build their skills. And in response to that, we're seeing traditional institutions, educational institutions, we're seeing non-traditional providers. We've been seeing this over the last 5 or so years surface as a way to help learners, help people on their career journeys better develop skills that make them both more marketable and more effective in the roles that they want to play in their careers. And so I think it's really been a response to this shift in how we think about learning and why and how we want to build the right kind of skills to make ourselves successful as individuals. And we're watching micro-credentials surface as a way to address that shift.
Right. So microcredentials is a response to the shift in the world of work. So is this a demand from the learners or a demand from the employers or neither both of them?
Oh, that's a great question. It's a demand from both of them. I think we're hearing from employers that their new employees are coming into their organizations not equipped to be successful out of the gate. And then we're hearing from the learners themselves, they don't feel as though they're able to be effective in their roles as they start in new roles, or they don't have the skills to then grow. So I think we're seeing it from both sides. And we're seeing in the intersection of that education, workforce development, learning, other kinds of non-traditional learning opportunities, try to address either the workplace need or the learner need or both in micro-credentials and other kinds of alternative programs and learning opportunities to really address the skills gap that's surfaced.
So many of these programs in micro-credentials surface from need of people in IT, technology, and also programmers, data scientists, cybersecurity, now AI. And I want to be a little bit skeptic now for the moment. So these programs have made the big companies in technology like Google, Amazon, IBM, Apple, etc., declare that we no longer need degrees. What we need is if you can have a portfolio or whatever of evidence that you have a competency, then I will hire you. I think that is easy to do when you're not finding the talent that you need from graduates, from graduates from universities. And you hire people, the next best thing that you have as a proxy is a micro-credential now. But how much is this happening in other disciplines, in other areas? And how much do you expect that to grow and why?
Yeah, I'm going to be a skeptic with you on this. I think there are transparent places where the skills and the competencies needed can be delivered through a micro-credential. You've already made some really good examples. Some of the science skills, data science, we're seeing cybersecurity surface that way. There's some hard underlying skills in that can be developed in micro-credential settings. But where I'm a skeptic is there are this either softer skills, the critical thinking skills, the reasoning skills, the teamwork skills, these things that we use every day in our jobs that are hard to demonstrate in micro-credential settings. And so I start to wonder, is there a balance there between how we bring these hard skills that employers need and that learners need in order to get the kinds of careers and jobs they want with some of that softer skills that are developed in educational settings that are potentially more traditional, more like a degree program, where you spend 4 years working towards certain outcomes that bring you into these places where you are collaborating with others, you're developing negotiation skills, collaborative skills, you're understanding how to think differently and solve problems. So I do think the micro-credentials are good and in response in a good way to this need to competency build, but at the same time, we need to make sure we're not sacrificing through those micro-credentials these other skills that we're taking for granted that really make people highly effective in the workplace and in their communities even.
Yeah. I understand what you said. I think that you're right to be skeptical about this, but I think also that it will depend on how that micro-credential is being developed. No, if it's a traditional self-paced multiple choice course, it will be difficult to do that. I will also say that in a university that is very traditional and maybe is lecture-based, high-stakes exam kind of educational model, there's not a lot of intention on the development of those horizontal transversal skills, and there are settings that are much better suited for the development of those skills, like for instance, a more active environment, challenge, dual degree, like scope, maybe scope in English is this German model that is a dual education model where people go into the study, etc. So maybe there are some micro-credential programs that can have the opportunity of developing those skills, and it will be also maybe a way of differentiating between them.
Yeah, that's a really good point. The more project-based or even application-based kind of micro-credentials could definitely deliver that. And like thinking about that, not all micro-credentials are the same and drive in the same way and result in the same outcomes that we're trying to accomplish. I think that's a really important point. And that we can, as we're thinking about how to build these micro-credentials, incorporate in both those horizontal skills that you're referring to alongside some of the more hard skills that employers are looking for and learners are trying to develop. That's a very good point.
There's another thing. There is recognition of credentials. And also, for instance, in Mexico, several years ago, we initiated a movement of creating public 2-year degree universities or colleges to form people for more advanced technical things, but that doesn't require the 4-year university degree. And these universities had not been very successful to achieve a recognition on the market, on the labor market. Also, the employers not necessarily value the degree, and some of them have morphed into teaching university, a 4-year teaching university degree. It has not been the case everywhere. I know that in other countries, like maybe in Chile or in other parts of Latin America, US, Europe, etc., those programs are very successful. But I wonder, what will happen with microcredentials in terms of recognition from the labor market, because it's not given that it will work.
Yeah, I think there are challenges, like you've described in Mexico. I think there are also challenges globally around that same issue. And it's really validating microcredentials. I think this leads into even just simple badging programs. We're starting to see this question around what's the currency behind that, or what's the validity behind that? Not just we can prove that that's aligned to skills and here's the work that students have done, but more about, do these truly become marketable as a way to demonstrate your abilities in the workplace? And I think what globally, from a learning perspective, we need to start to tackle is, how do we build currency behind these? How do we create consistency of quality? How do we think about how we're crafting microcredentials to directly align to those skills and be effective? And to do all of that, we need to partner closely with the corporate space or the employment space, or wherever learners are going next after they're completing these microcredentials badges, or even some more traditional degrees. Like, how do we partner with industry to ensure that we are seeing and developing the right kinds of programs that have value, have currency underneath them? Because if we don't do that, the challenge is we start to dilute the value of all of them. So if there's a lot of programs out there that don't drive the right kind of value or build the right kinds of skills, can those hurt the ones that do that? Because, universally, people are going to start to not accept those programs as well as they should. So I do think we have a challenge here, and there's an opportunity for those of us that are building these programs. I actually teach in one, to be very thoughtful about the meaning and the skills coming out of those, and partnering with industry to drive that in the right direction, so that we're not negatively affecting all microcredentials or all of the opportunities here for learners to have alternative pathways to education.
Well, interesting. So in this regard, I think there's a spectrum from no regulation at all and a lot of regulation from the government. No, we have seen, and the European Union recently they have launched a microcredential program for universities, where they encourage universities to do that. That has some guidelines. I think they are relatively loose. And maybe 4 years ago, New Zealand also launched a microcredential program that was very aspirational, everywhere. From what I understand, the Minister of Education is running that program. They decided that microcredentials will be registered with the same bureaucratic process than bachelor's degree. And also, it will take up to maybe 2 years to register a micro-credential, no? So if we want recognition by industry, by business, and by the society, it may be necessary or not to have some kind of regulation in this spectrum, from nothing to a lot. What do you think will be the right mix of either self-regulation or government regulation to increase the value of micro-credentials?
That's a outstanding question. I know we've, in the U.S., tackled this from a financial aid perspective. So we've chosen to use regulation around what is valid to use financial aid for and what's not. And that's starting to set the bar for what are good quality micro-credentials and what aren't. It's indirectly doing that, but we've come at it from that direction in the U.S. I think there's a middle ground where there is regulation in how those programs are being constructed, the micro-credential programs, and how they're being assessed. So many accreditation programs around the world want continuous improvement built into your programs. So how are you building these programs, how are you then looking at the outcomes that students are achieving and then evaluating those outcomes and evaluating how successful the program is to develop to achieve those outcomes, and then feeding back in that loop continuous improvement. So you're always ensuring that where there are gaps, you're filling those and you're continually expanding the way that program delivers skills. So I think, to me, regulation around ensuring there's reflection, there's assessment, reflection, and continuous improvement is a good thing. But I worry about over-regulation, and I'd be really curious your thoughts here. If we over-regulate, are we going to stifle innovation in the micro-credential space? And if it becomes over-federally mandated or government, owned by at that federal level, does that also slow the progress of these down?
Yeah. Yes, I agree with what you say. This I think over-regulation is not a good idea. But I'm not sure that no intervention at all is the best way, because I imagine that an employer receives a curriculum where it says that someone has a micro-credential, and at the end, the value of that will be by the prestige of the brand, let's say, that is delivering that micro-credential. Like if that micro-credential is delivered by one of the big companies, like I say Google, Amazon, or imagine McKinsey for a micro-credentialing strategy, or I don't know, risk analysis for Deloitte, etc. People will say, if one of these companies is delivering these credentials, I will believe that there are a good credential. But what about the rest? There's no way of understanding the value of them.
Yeah, it's interesting. The references the McKinsey idea or the Google or Amazon. What's known for those behind those companies' brands is the rigor at which they develop their solutions. Right? There's an implied rigor. There's an implied operational excellence in that, and so those brands carry forward, just like you said, and the credential brands would carry forward with that. And you're right. What happens with those that don't have that kind of rigor? How do we either show, if the brand doesn't have that rigor behind them, how do we show the rigor? Or how do we make sure, again, they don't dilute the good quality of other programs out there? And so I totally agree that the regulation should help us surface the best, but also drive innovation, but then also help us identify what's not delivering what it should from a micro-credential perspective and why. And how do we not allow that to dilute the overall value of micro-credentials?
What do you think is the role that universities can play in this space?
I think universities are great places to be building and demonstrating excellence in micro-credentials. This is universities' true skill at the end of the day is being able to unpack complex situations, problems, help work through those. And I'm thinking from all the way from the science perspective through to business issues. That complexity, universities can really train people to unpack and work through complexity and solve problems, while at the same time as good universities know how to teach well. And the other concern I have with micro-credentials is, depending on who's building and delivering these, are they only focused on skills and not how you teach skills? Because you need to have that foundational understanding of how adults learn, brain science. All of that needs to be part of how you construct the learning activities that are embedded in the credential. So to me, universities are in the ideal spot to be able to deliver the best micro-credentials because they understand both parts, the complexity and how to truly deliver learning.
It's One of the perceptions in some universities is that micro-credentials are like an alternative credential to the degree. And maybe this comes because of claims of providers, startups, companies of micro-credentials. What do you think is the future of an ecosystem where we have degrees and micro-credentials?
Um, I, I'll share my thoughts, and then I'd also love your thoughts. I know you all have launched Tec de Monterrey programs, and I'd be curious where you've seen the balance. But what I've seen with universities is they may be seen as alternatives to degrees. I like to think of them, and we're seeing some more progressive institutions think of them as stop-offs in degrees. So it is an opportunity for a learner, especially if you use a micro-credential embedded in an existing degree, or you have a collection of learning opportunities that are developing skills that make a degree that much more marketable. So you can use those two avenues. Those are places where it only creates a deeper relationship with the university and the student. And it only enables that student to recognize the skills and the learning they've done, perhaps in a shorter period of time. So if the micro-credential is a year long, or it's a series of 4 courses that they do over 6-month period, or even something smaller than that, that gives that learner an opportunity to say, oh, I completed this. I can reflect on how did I work through that experience, and I see how that connects to my larger world. And it can either motivate that learner to continue on through their degree. It can either make that degree that much more valuable for that learner when they exit. Or if they choose, okay, at this point in my life, I need to step away from university, that gets me to my next stage. It also helps them, though, create that connection with the university, because you can then pull them back in and say, 2 years from now, have you seen these other offerings that augment that credential with a broader degree? Or you can use that towards your degree completion back at our institution, and that can then advance your career into the next step, right? Life happens. We don't always get to take the path we want to take. And so the thing that I think micro-credentials can do is help you take a zigzag path at times and still have a deep connection with the university. So I don't think it's an either or, but I very much understand why it's being seen that way, especially when large companies like a Google or Microsoft come out and say, we don't necessarily want to require a degree anymore. That creates concern over the value of the degree, rather than, can you find a way to have a world where both micro-credentials and degrees together make that learner the best employee for their career, especially as they exit the university.
Yeah. So I think it's very compatible to what we have done and we think here in the Institute for the Future of Education. So a few years ago, we launched a report on alternative credentials done by the Observatory of the Institute for the Future of Education that launched a series of discussions inside the university and a series of pilots. And those pilots were assessed and evaluated. And then last year, we changed our norms inside the university. So now our undergraduate degrees that are structured by competencies and challenge-based, so the students have a lot of opportunities of engaging with real-world problems and develop a set of a portfolio to evaluate the competencies in their skill sets. Now those degrees, undergraduate degrees, can deliver micro-credential for partial studies. So now a student can have a micro-credential in digital marketing or in risk assessment or in web programming, etc. And that has the advantage that you can have something even if you leave the university early, or even if you want to work and continue studying at the same time. And on the other side, we have done something that is relatively easy in Anglo-Saxon countries, in the US, and in Mexico it's not that easy. In Latin America in general, continuous education and 4-degree education cannot mix. But we were able to develop a set of programs that deliver microcredentials, standalone microcredentials, and some of them by design can stack over a degree, either an undergraduate or a graduate degree. So it's I think it's the first stones in the construction of something that will allow people to find their own pathway of how they want to move in from higher ed to work and back to higher ed, or starting in micro-credentials, alternative credentials, and then going into a more depth degree.
I love that. That's incredible work, and I think very progressive work, and work that will continue to foundationally create the value in your micro-credentials, but also the value of the relationship between the learner and the university for their entire life, which is really powerful. So often with degrees, you come in and then you leave, and then you may not have a relationship with your university ever again. And that's challenging for universities. First of all, they can't learn. How do they continue to evolve as an institution and excel? But then that's also can be a challenge for, even opportunities to grow your own offerings and be able to fund and service those offerings in meaningful ways. So having that lifelong experience with a learner, that's exactly what you're doing is creating the opportunity to do that. And I think some of the, like I said, the most progressive and innovative institutions are thinking that way, that it's not either or, but it's both. And how do we make that most meaningful?
Thank you, Melissa. I want to end this conversation with a challenging question for you. If you can say, in your opinion, some recommendations to universities, maybe a structure like this. What are the do's of micro-credentials and the don'ts of micro-credentials, if you want to start into that area?
I would love to. A few do's is be thoughtful with your micro-credential, both about the skills and outcomes that are being delivered via that micro-credential and how each of those opportunities are woven together in the micro-credential. I've seen, and this would be on the don't side, micro-credentials where it's just a collection of courses all under a same theme, but there's no consistent experience from course to course. So one thing I teach, like I said, I teach in a micro-credential program, and we meet as instructors in that program often to make sure, one, we're not overlapping what we're doing in each of our courses, but two, and more importantly, there's a true learner journey, and that each one of our courses stacks on skills and advances skills throughout that. And I see institutions quickly rushing to build micro-credentials where they just say, oh, it's these 5 courses in cybersecurity, we're good. And all of the instructors go off and they teach their individual courses, and there's no cohesion to that learning experience. You're missing out on so much more you can bring the learner. So that's one. I'll share 2 others. The second one is be thoughtful about what you badge if you're badging within your micro-credential. So you can have 2 different paths to micro-credentials. You can have a set of experiences and you get a badge or a program or a certificate at the end of those experiences, or you can badge along the way. The thing I've seen is when universities start to transition into micro-credentials and specifically transition into badging, they suddenly say, well, I'll just badge a course. And badging a course isn't a competency or an experience. There's competency experiences within that course. And that's what we need to be acknowledging, not necessarily a course. So again, I think a do is be very thoughtful about the skills and the competencies and how they connect, and badge and award the right kind of recognition for the right pieces of that. And don't rush to try to transform, again, 5 courses that you're currently teaching into a micro-credential in the state that they are currently in their degree. And then I think the last thing that I'll say is be innovative and want to take risks, because the only way we're going to move this space forward, I think you all have done a really great job at that. Be comfortable not having it work perfectly out of the gate, but try to move and then continue to reflect on that and innovate, because this is such a new world. Even though we've had micro-credentials, like I said, the last 5-7 years, people have been offering them, the predominance of microcredentials and the desire for them is so different today than it's been in the past. It's time to leverage that and learn and grow from that and be able to balance speed with excellence and not lean too far on excellence right out of the gate. And I think as institutions, I know I've worked in one for a very long time, taught for a very long time. We tend to want to be perfect all the time and not make mistakes, and we tend to move slow. So my last word of advice is have some speed in your work, take some risks, and get out there and learn from that, because it is evolving rapidly and the opportunity is now.
We have to experiment and measure and remember that perfect is enemy of good.
That's right. That is absolutely right.
Thank you very much, Melissa, for your time and for sharing your knowledge about the future of credentialing in education. I've been very happy to talk to you. I enjoy the talk, and I'm sure that our audience will value this talk. Also, expect to see you soon in Monterrey in the Institute for the Future of Education, and host you here in our conference in January, from the 23rd to the 25th of January in our IFE conference.
Fantastic. Thank you. This has been such a wonderful conversation. Thank you for having me. I've learned through this conversation as well, and I would love to be there.
Great. See you soon. For more information, visit observatory.tec.mx/edutrendspodcast and ife.tec.mx. A special thanks to Tecnológico de Monterrey, the Institute for the Future of Education, and the Tec Sounds team. Tec Sounds producer Miguel Mejia. EduTrends producers Esteban Venegas and Christian Igosa. Stay tuned and play Tec Sounds in your favorite podcast app for other great shows and content.